2018 NFL Draft. The Cleveland Browns select.
The first-year player draft is a significant part of team building in North American sport. Many teams look to the draft to rebuild themselves into contenders, which gives fans something to look forward to even when their current team stinks. For those stinky teams, stacking up losses in the regular season results in a better draft pick, which theoretically means they get better players to help the club in the long run. Even for teams that aren't losing every game, the draft is a way to find good players and round out the roster with high-quality bench options and depth. So regardless of your team's position in the standings, the draft is uber important to your team's future. Today, we're going to dive into the draft and learn a little bit about why the draft is such an important event for every single team, as well as some of the draft strategies that teams should be utilizing but aren't currently. Don't forget to like and subscribe below, and leave a comment about what you would like to see on the channel next. A quick note before we get any further. North American player drafts are conducted in the inverse order of the final standings. That means that the team that wins the championship in the previous season gets the lowest draft pick of each round, and the team with the worst record in the previous season gets the top draft pick. That order continues through however many rounds the draft has, with the worst team having the right to the top pick in every single round of the draft. So why do teams love the first-year player draft so much? There are a few big reasons. Firstly, players acquired through the draft are cheap and must be under contract with their teams for a few guaranteed years. Those contracts give general managers certainty that they can build their roster around. If you know that you have superstar quarterback Patrick Mahomes on your team for the next 3 years, you can build around Mahomes to win a lot of games in those 3 guaranteed years. Plus, it's really much easier to stay under the salary cap if your best players are basically being paid peanuts compared to the rest of the league. You can learn more about salary caps and the rules in my previous video in this series. Teams also love the draft because they can utilize these draft picks to pick players or even trade these picks to other teams for other assets. A first-round pick can be used to select a high-quality player, or it can be used to trade with another team for an already established high-quality player. For example, the Los Angeles Lakers gave up a few first-round picks in a trade to acquire superstar forward Anthony Davis in 2019. In this example, the Lakers are giving up the right to draft a future player in order to have a current player join their team. Multiple draft picks, or a collection of picks, is known as draft capital. Acquiring lots of draft capital is a popular strategy for teams like the Oklahoma City Thunder in the NBA, who may not be able to attract superstar free agents. These teams use their massive draft capital to trade for good players as opposed to acquiring them through free agency, because popular free agents are usually not interested in Oklahoma City and are instead looking to go to big coastal cities like Los Angeles and Miami. Teams that have a bad on-field product like the Detroit Red Wings, or should I say bad on-ice product, use their draft capital to rebuild their team from the ground up. These teams know that their current team is stinky and thus not going to contend for a championship. The front office chooses to trade their quality players for draft picks. These picks can be used to select quality players that will fit the team's new style so that in the future, the Red Wings can once again compete for a championship. The stinky teams trade away their current players who have any sort of value attached to them for as many draft picks as they can, because the young talent that can be selected with these future draft picks is more valuable to them than the wins that they might rack up in the present day with their current players. Even teams that have a good on-field product, like the current Kansas City Chiefs, can use the draft to their advantage. Good teams usually have quality players at nearly every position, so these teams have the luxury of drafting players that need to take some time to develop, but then eventually flourish into a solid replacement for the current star player. It can be a little more difficult to find superstar players if you have a lower draft pick, because theoretically the teams at the top of the draft are supposed to be grabbing the players who are more likely to be major league talent. The further you go back in the draft, the more uncertain you are about the player's talent level and how it'll translate to the big leagues. Also, being able to continually replenish your aging players with cheaper and younger players makes it easier to stay under the salary cap for longer. If those same players are of the same quality as older players at the same position, it makes the general manager's decision even easier regarding who to retain and who to release from the roster from year to year, which makes the draft just as important for those teams that are drafting at the back of the round as it is for the teams that are drafting at the front of the round. Okay, so you've heard me say that the draft gives teams cheaper players. Now we're going to learn why that is. Rookies and recently drafted players across the NBA and NFL are all subject to different salary requirements than free agents and older players are. These requirements are known as the rookie salary scale. After being drafted, players are bound to their teams for up to 5 years unless they sign an extension to stay even longer. Most rookie players sign what are called rookie contracts. These rookie contracts agree that the player will be paid a set amount of money that gradually increases for their first few years in the league. The average rookie salary depends on where the player is drafted. Players drafted high up in the first round are set to make more money on their rookie deals than the players who are drafted at the end of the first round. Now here is the NBA rookie salary scale. As you can see, there is an enormous difference in annual salary between the first overall pick and the 30th overall pick. The salary scale ensures that players are gradually paid more money as they go through the life of their contract, but that these rookies can sign for no more than the numbers that you see listed. The scale ensures that players are paid less than their market value, because even the best player in the draft is capped at about $12 million per year in their first year in the league. Now, of course, that sounds like a lot of money for someone in a regular industry, but that's a pretty light salary for a professional athlete of first overall pick caliber, especially when those athletes are generating that much money in revenue for their team, from ticket sales to media rights to merchandise money. Since teams don't have to pay younger players as much as they deserve to get when they're on rookie contracts, there's an incentive to have a younger roster with more players on rookie contracts. The team doesn't have to go through the arduous process of acquiring free agents. Plus, a cheaper roster allows for more flexibility when constructing the roster. Cheaper players are much easier to trade than expensive players are. So if we're talking about players of similar quality but different ages, teams are almost certainly going to want to play the younger one and find a way to keep the older one at a lower price or even get rid of the older one, because the older player is just going to cost you more money overall. Now, the rookie contract also provides another benefit for contending teams. Underpaying some of your most dynamic talent allows you to build around that talent and supplement them with as much help as they might need to win games. A football example would be the Los Angeles Rams constructing their roster around Jared Goff. When Goff, who was the number 1 pick, was getting paid virtually nothing, the Los Angeles Rams were able to acquire good talent to build a strong team around him. They were also able to absorb the contracts of some good but overpaid veteran players and at the same time stay under the NFL salary cap because of how little money their most important player was making relative to the rest of the team. So where is the value in drafting? Conventional wisdom says that the best players in the draft are more often than not selected in the first 10 picks, and that you always want the highest pick possible, because the higher the pick you have, the higher the quality of the player you're supposedly getting. The second player drafted should be the second best player in the draft, the third player drafted should be the third best player in the draft, and so on and so forth. So theoretically, by the time you get to the end of the first round, there really aren't that many above average or elite players left to be selected. This is actually not the case at all. As many Jacksonville Jaguars fans can tell you, selecting a player towards the top of the draft is not even close to a guarantee that the player is actually very good. Evaluating talent, even at the top of the draft, where the players are almost expected to be contributors at the big league level, is actually really hard to do. Most player evaluations end up being off by at least a little bit. Teams at the back of the first round and beyond are still going to end up getting high quality above average players. And since those players are subject to the rookie pay scale, some really good players end up being way underpaid, even more than they normally would be on a rookie contract. Some of the best players in the NBA and the NFL end up being selected way after the first 10 picks. For example, two-time NBA MVP Giannis Antetokounmpo was selected 15th overall. NFL MVP Lamar Jackson was selected with the 32nd overall pick by the Baltimore Ravens. The list could go on and on with players who are way better than the place that they were selected in, which is just an example of how evaluating talent is a bit of a crapshoot. The teams that are able to find these valuable players somehow, even after drafting towards the back of the first round, are able to prolong their contention window for a little bit longer. If you can keep finding good players to replenish your roster and substitute those young players in for the older players, it enables your team to continually stay under the cap and stay competitive. The San Antonio Spurs were able to continually win and contend for titles in large part because they kept finding really good players at the back of the draft and in their late round picks to replenish their bench players and supplement their star players for relatively low cost. It actually makes more sense to trade backwards in the draft, almost regardless of where your team is drafting. Teams that are drafting at the top of each round probably have a ton of holes on their roster that one great draft pick isn't going to fix. Even if the Jacksonville Jaguars think that they have their quarterback of the next decade with the first overall pick in the 2021 NFL Draft, they still have a ton of positions that they need to address. So trading backwards and acquiring even more draft picks, draft capital, and even more usable players would add quality depth to their team. Trading backwards from the first pick to grab a handful of valuable picks gives the team several chances to hit the lottery and find a superstar player. A pair of economists actually confirmed trading back is actually beneficial in a study a few years ago. They found that the chances of a player being drafted first overall at their position was only slightly more likely to start more games than the player who was drafted second overall at their position. It makes more sense to take advantage of a team that falls in love with a certain player and really feels confident in their evaluation, and trade backwards with them to reap the draft capital that comes with it. Remember, evaluating players is a bit of a crapshoot. It's still basically a 50-50 shot whether that player is going to be good or not. Even if you scouted a player 100 times and you're absolutely sure that this player is going to be a superstar, there is still a good chance that they will turn out to be a huge bust in the major leagues. There are some people that just don't like the draft or the principles that the draft is based on, with some reasons for that being more valid than others, in my opinion. One thing that I think is fairly ridiculous is that analysts and commentators like to compare the draft and the draft process to socialism, whether or not they understand the meaning of the word socialism in the first place. People may think that distributing the best draft picks to the worst teams and the worst picks to the best teams will eventually even out all the resources and make all the teams equally balanced, which they then consider to be socialism. If you took a couple of seconds to just think about this statement and what it entails, you would realize that this is just patently false. The draft is of course important, but is by no means the only way to build a quality team year in and year out. Teams are built via trades, free agency, international signings, and so on, not just the draft. Teams can develop competitive advantages to ensure that they maintain their contending status year in and year out, even as they continue to receive what are viewed as lower value picks in the draft. Some competitive advantages include things like a specialized model or a computer algorithm that properly evaluates players. The draft is not socialism, nor does any North American sport league distribute resources in a way that would qualify as socialism. A more valid reason to dislike the draft is that the draft is really unfair to the individual player who's being drafted. Since the team holds the rights to pick each player, the people who are drafted have virtually no choice as to where they spend the first few years of their careers. To explain why this is so frustrating for players, imagine that you are the best accountant in the country. Fresh out of college, you're looking for your first accounting job. Unfortunately, you are forced to work at some firm in some cold city in the Midwest that you hate, instead of near your family or your friends, because the firm in the Midwest had the first pick in the accountant's draft. You really wanted to live and work in Miami because it's sunny, it's close to your family, and you love the beach, but the Miami firm only had the 23rd pick of the accountants, and you were already selected by the time Miami had the chance to pick. Another valid reason for disliking the draft is that it majorly suppresses earnings for athletes. Pro athletes have a limited amount of time in which they are performing at their full athletic potential, and an even more limited time to earn what they truly deserve. The rookie contracts and contract scale only further cut into these athletes' earning potentials by taking away several years in which the players have their full athleticism and faster recovery times that make them attractive to teams. The average career length in the NFL is about 3 years. If players play only 3 years, they won't even play long enough to get off of their rookie deals. With their career this short, they don't even get the chance to earn the millions of dollars that they generated for their NFL team while playing. They're dealing permanent damage to their body while being paid virtually nothing to do so. It's like if you wrote a book that sold millions of copies, but the publishers agreed to pay you only a couple of $100 regardless of how many copies it actually sold and how much money it made for the publishers. You'd be missing out on so much extra money that you deserve to have based on your own hard work, and you didn't even really have any say in how much you were being paid in the first place. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed my thoughts on the draft. Tune in next time for more thoughts on team building and team construction.